I'm 26 years old now, and just a few months ago, I accomplished something I'd been dreaming of for years. I bought my first house. For nearly 8 years, I lived with roommates in a cramped city apartment. I craved solitude, silence, and space to breathe. So when I finally signed the papers, I felt like I was taking control of my life for the first time. The house I bought was in a quiet, rural area called Pinebrook, about a 2-hour drive from my old place in the city. Pinebrook wasn't exactly a ghost town, but it definitely didn't have the hustle and bustle I was used to. The houses were few and far between, scattered across the landscape with stretches of trees and empty fields in between. My house was one of the more modest ones on the market. Affordable, simple, and tucked away in a heavily wooded area about 4 miles from Pinebrook's town center. It was small, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was isolated. On the day I moved in, I hadn't met a single soul from the area. Not the neighbors, not even someone from town. With thick pine trees surrounding the property and no other houses visible from my windows, it honestly felt like I was moving into a little pocket of the world that belonged only to me. I rented a moving van for the day and worked quickly to unload all my things. I wasn't trying to organize much yet, just wanted everything inside before the sun went down. So I stacked most of the boxes in the living room and figured I'd sort them later. By the time I was hauling in the last couple of boxes, the sun was already setting. A warm orange glow cut through the forest trees, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all looked. But that peace didn't last long. I turned around toward the driveway, and that's when I saw him. A man, probably in his early 50s, stood on my front porch. He was positioned in such a way that he almost completely blocked the front door. I hadn't heard him approach. No crunch of leaves. No sound of footsteps. Just there. He startled me, making me flinch and nearly drop the box in my hands. I asked if I could help him, trying to keep my tone polite despite the sudden jolt of anxiety in my chest. He smiled, not wide, not friendly. Just enough. Then he said he was my new neighbor and wanted to welcome me to Pinebrook. I forced a smile and told him it was nice to meet him. But inside, my thoughts were spinning. I hadn't seen him walking up the long dirt driveway. There were no cars, no bikes, no sound at all. Just forest in every direction. Where had he come from? Without saying much more, the man lingered there silently for a few seconds, then turned and walked off the porch into the woods. No goodbye. No direction. Just vanished behind the trees. I stood there, holding my last box, trying to shake off the weirdness of that encounter. Eventually, I went back inside, double-checked the locks, and peered out the windows. No sign of him. The forest swallowed him whole. I grabbed the van keys, drove it back to the rental office in town, and called a taxi to bring me home. The whole time, I kept thinking about that man. It had only been minutes since I'd seen him, and yet I never passed him on the road or saw any sign of someone walking through the woods. Back home, I started assembling some furniture. I was too tired to unpack everything, but I wanted to at least set up my bed before crashing. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the walls settling and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Then came the knock. A single, deliberate knock at the front door. My heart froze. I hadn't heard anyone approach, not a single footstep on the porch. Slowly, I stood up and crept toward the door, trying not to make a sound. I looked through the peephole. It was him, the same man from earlier that day. But this time, something was different. Terribly, disturbingly different. His body was twitching slightly, like he couldn't control his limbs. His head moved in small, erratic motions, yet his eyes were locked, unblinking, on the doorknob. Not the door itself. The knob. As if he was waiting for it to turn. "Hey, it's your neighbor. Mind opening the door?" His voice was louder this time, slightly strained. And he knocked again, harder. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Just watched through the peephole with a mix of dread and disbelief. His expression began to change. The fake politeness drained from his face, replaced with something else, frustration. Maybe even anger. He banged on the door again, louder this time. I jumped back instinctively. Then suddenly he stopped. He turned around and faced the forest. The darkness beyond the porch seemed endless, the trees like tall silhouettes against the night. Slowly, the man raised his hand and waved. A strange, fluid motion, almost like he was signaling. Then, without warning, he bolted off the porch and ran into the woods, vanishing in seconds into the dark. I stood there frozen, staring at the spot he had disappeared into. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and called the local police. Officers arrived about 25 minutes later. They searched the surrounding woods but found nothing. No sign of the man, no tracks, no indication anyone had even been there. I described him in detail. His height, approximate age, gray flannel shirt, the awkward way he moved. None of the officers recognized him. And over the following weeks, I asked around town too. No one knew who he was. I met most of my neighbors after that night. Friendly folks, a few retirees, some young families. Not one of them matched the man who knocked at my door. None had seen him. None had heard of him. Whoever he was, it was as if he never existed, except in that one unsettling night. And what haunts me the most, what keeps me up even now, is the moment he turned and waved into the forest. Who was he signaling to? Was someone, or something, out there watching? Was this man sent to test me, to see if I'd open the door? I don't know what would have happened if I had, but I've never stopped wondering. Some doors, I believe, are best left unopened. The highway stretched endlessly before me, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights and the occasional flicker of a roadside sign. I was fighting to stay awake, my eyes heavy, my body sore. It was well past 1 a.m., and I had been driving for over 15 hours straight. I glanced at my GPS again, silently willing the arrival time to speed up. I just wanted to be home, or rather, my new home, a place I'd never even seen in person. My job had suddenly relocated me to a small town called Elmridge. Tucked away in a rural part of the state, I hadn't had time to visit before the move. Everything had been arranged remotely, leases signed, boxes shipped, movers hired. It was the strangest transition of my life. As I finally exited the highway and turned into Elmridge, I was hit with an odd sense of unfamiliarity. The town was eerily quiet, and most of the shops I passed were local, family-run places with their lights turned off for the night. Compared to the city life I had left behind, Elmridge felt frozen in time. The streets were deserted. The air was still. It felt more like driving through a forgotten movie set than a real town. Eventually, I pulled into a residential neighborhood. It wasn't too bad. Modest homes lined the street, each with similar architecture and neatly trimmed lawns. My new address was 214 Norhollow Drive. I parked along the curb and stepped out of the car, stretching my legs and taking a good look at the house I'd be calling home for the next year. On the outside, it looked identical to the others, 2 stories, brick facade, a small porch. I walked up the driveway and pulled out the key that had been mailed to me by the property manager. I slid it into the lock, turned it, but there was no click. The door was already unlocked. I froze for a second. Had the movers forgotten to lock up? I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside, half expecting something to feel off. But everything looked okay at first glance. The boxes were all there, neatly stacked in the living room, just as I'd requested. Furniture wrapped in plastic leaned against the walls. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. Still, the fact that the door was unlocked unsettled me. I brushed it off, chalking it up to a careless mover, and told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. But then I hit the second problem: no electricity. The lights didn't work. Nothing powered on. I had assumed the utilities would be running by now, but apparently, I still had to go into town to officially activate the service. At this hour, that wasn't going to happen. With only the flashlight from my phone to guide me, I began exploring the house. The downstairs was nothing special, slightly outdated but clean. Wooden floors, white walls, and an old fireplace gave it a rustic charm. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, where a narrow hallway greeted me with 5 closed doors. One by one, I opened them, shining my phone's flashlight into each. The rooms were small and mostly empty. A few had water stains on the ceilings or peeling wallpaper, but nothing that raised any red flags. Until I reached the last door at the end of the hallway, the master bedroom. I opened the door and paused. The room was empty, except for one thing. A single tarp lay in the middle of the floor, wrinkled, stained, and dirty. It looked like something movers might have used to wrap furniture, but none of the furniture or boxes were upstairs. I stood there for a long second, just staring at it. It didn't make sense. Why would a tarp be the only thing left in this room? I slowly stepped back, closing the door without investigating further. I was too tired to deal with anything strange. I told myself it was just leftover from the move. Nothing more. Back downstairs, I collapsed into a wrapped-up armchair and closed my eyes for what felt like just a few moments. A sudden thud from above jolted me awake. My heart leapt into my throat. The sound had been loud, sharp, and definitely came from the second floor. I sat still for a moment, trying to figure out if I'd actually fallen asleep or just drifted into a daze. Either way, the noise had been real. Slowly, I stood up and tiptoed to the bottom of the stairs, craning my neck to look up the dark hallway above. It was silent now. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and turned on the flashlight again. Step by step, the stairs creaked beneath my feet as I ascended. When I reached the top, I shined my light down the hallway. My stomach dropped. The door to the master bedroom, the one with the tarp, was open just a crack, and in the narrow space between the door and the frame, I saw a figure. A tall, shadowy outline stood in the doorway, unmoving, just watching me. My legs nearly gave out. Without thinking, I spun around and sprinted down the stairs, heart racing and mind screaming. I burst out the front door and dove into my car, slamming the lock shut behind me. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I watched the house from the driver's seat. I expected to see movement in the windows, but nothing happened. No one came out. No shadow moved past the curtains. It was like the house had swallowed the figure whole. When the police arrived, I explained everything. They took me seriously, thankfully, and entered the house with flashlights drawn. I waited on the curb, shivering despite the warm night air. About 15 minutes later, one of the officers came back out and told me something I'll never forget. The back door had been wide open. Whoever had been in the house had slipped out before the police could find them. The officer said it looked like someone had been staying there, possibly hiding out in the house ever since it had been vacant. I asked if they meant the attic, but he shook his head. No attic in this place. We're talking about the master bedroom upstairs. My blood ran cold. I had checked that room earlier. I opened the door. The tarp was all I had seen. That meant whoever was there, whoever I saw standing in the doorway, had been inside the room the first time I looked. Maybe hiding behind the door, or crouched against the wall, watching me the entire time. If I had stepped further into the room, if I had gone to examine the tarp more closely, I might not have made it out at all. This happened about 3 years ago, back when I was in a pretty rough spot financially. I'd just gotten out of a messy situation, job loss, rent piling up, and had no choice but to move somewhere cheaper. The place I ended up in was a small, one-story home on the edge of Hollow Creek, a neighborhood with a reputation that made most people raise their eyebrows. Crime, squatters, break-ins, you name it, it happened there. But it was all I could afford at the time. And besides, I'd only moved about a mile from where I lived before, so it wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Still, I never really went to that side of town unless I absolutely had to. The house itself was modest, kind of old, creaky floors, chipped paint, but it was mine. I moved everything in by myself using a rental van. I didn't see anyone that first day. Not a neighbor, not even a car passing by. On day 2, I started unpacking, sorting boxes, deciding what furniture went where, trying to create a sense of order from the chaos. Around midday, I began working on my little home office setup. That's when I saw something outside that made me pause. There was a man, early 20s, maybe mid, just standing in my driveway. He wasn't doing anything, just staring up at the house. I watched from the second-story window as he slowly stepped onto the lawn and started peering into my windows from a distance, moving from side to side like he was studying the place. My stomach twisted. I backed away from the window and went downstairs, ready to confront him or at least see what he wanted. But by the time I opened the door, he was gone. Completely gone. He wasn't in the yard, not on the sidewalk, not even down the street. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I stood there for a few seconds, scanning the area, but saw nothing. Eventually, I chalked it up as weird but not worth obsessing over. Maybe he was just a neighbor, or someone who got the wrong address. I got back to setting up my office, then headed out to grab a sandwich and some coffee before returning to work on the bedroom. By 8 p.m., I was exhausted. I had done as much as I could for one day, but the house was still half unpacked, with boxes scattered across every room. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and was out cold within minutes. It had been a long day, but at 3 a.m., something woke me. I rolled over and saw the time glowing faintly from the alarm clock still lying on the floor beside me. I groaned, pulled the blanket up, and tried to fall back asleep. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled dragging sound from somewhere downstairs. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I left a window cracked and the wind was blowing something across the floor. But then it came again, clearer this time. Something was being dragged. Slowly. Purposefully. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I held my breath, listening. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard another noise, like a dull scrape, and this time I was certain it wasn't the wind. I got up and opened my bedroom door slowly. The hallway was dark, and cold air drifted toward me from the staircase. As I stepped into the hall, the sounds abruptly stopped. I crept toward the stairs, each wooden floorboard creaking under my weight. When I got to the top step, I peeked over the railing. The house looked normal. Empty. Still. But something wasn't right, I felt it. I cautiously descended the stairs, one step at a time, and reached for the light switch. The room lit up, and that's when I noticed it. Several pieces of furniture, boxes, chairs, even the old bookshelf, had been moved away from the walls. Not by accident, but like someone had purposefully pushed them aside. And behind them, carved into the drywall, were holes. Jagged, uneven holes, like someone had used a tool to claw through the wall. Some were small, others were big enough to fit a head through. My pulse began to race. My brain tried to come up with explanations, but nothing made sense. I backed away slowly, realizing there was only one real possibility. Someone had broken into my home. Worse, someone might still be inside. I bolted upstairs, slammed my bedroom door shut, and grabbed my phone. I called the police and waited, clutching a heavy flashlight in one hand and trying to calm my breathing. The house remained completely silent. Not a single creak, not a whisper. Just me and whatever had happened downstairs. When the officers arrived about 10 minutes later, I rushed out to meet them and explained everything. They searched the entire place, top to bottom. Closets, basement, crawl spaces, even the backyard. But they didn't find anyone. No sign of forced entry either. Every window was locked. The front and back doors, still bolted from the inside. One of the officers examined the holes in the wall and said it looked like someone had been searching for something. Hidden money, maybe? Drugs? Something stashed in the walls long ago? I told them about the man I saw the day before, the one in my driveway. They said it could be connected, but without any other clues, they couldn't do much. They left after taking a report, telling me to keep my doors locked and call if anything else strange happened. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone hiding. Over the next few days, I tried to go back to normal. I patched up the holes, rearranged the furniture, tried not to think about it too much. But the more I thought about it, the more it got under my skin. Whoever had been in my house that night, they weren't looking to steal a TV or grab a wallet. They were searching for something, and they had taken their time doing it. Even now, 3 years later, I have no answers. The man in the driveway never came back. The police never found fingerprints or evidence of entry. But the worst part is the thought I can't shake. What if they hadn't left? What if they were still in the house when I went downstairs? What if they were watching me from one of those holes in the wall? I moved out 6 months later. I never felt safe in that house again. And to this day, I still wonder what that person was trying to find.